In the Gospels, whenever Jesus speaks of signs, especially the issue of signs from heaven, he does it with a certain degree of frustration because he wants to emphasize that those with faith don't need signs, or if there are any signs to be given, they're signs that are right there in front of us that we've had all along. He speaks of the sign of Jonah, in which Jonah was a sign for the Ninevites, and in the same example of the sign of Jonah, Solomon was a sign for the Queen of the South. They had something right there in front of them, and they responded to it. Jesus also speaks of the sign of Jonah in terms of Jonah being 3 days in the belly of the whale, so the Son of Man was 3 days in the bowels of the earth. And for those reading the gospel, either in that first generation of Christianity or today, we recognize that the empty tomb was a sign right there in front of those who witnessed it and then bore witness to the resurrection of Jesus. Or, as in the case of the story of the rich man and Lazarus, Jesus emphasizes the point that if you have the faith, then you don't need the sign. If you don't have the faith, then a sign will do no good, even if it is a sign of someone like the poor man Lazarus coming back from the dead to warn the brothers of the rich man. With faith, we don't need signs. Without faith, signs won't do us any good. In the Gospel of John, however, he has a whole series of signs that is encompassed in a section of the book called the Book of Signs, the first half of the Gospel of John, in which, starting with the wedding at Cana, the miracles of Jesus build one upon the other, leading to the great climax miracle, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, and of course leading to the great payoff sign, the sign of the cross, the crucifixion of Jesus, his glorification toward the end of the Gospel of John. But there are actually two signs in Cana in the Gospel of John. The first is, of course, changing water into wine, but the second is a sign that is extremely personal. Jesus is not in front of an audience. There's no grandiose build-up. In fact, Jesus himself isn't even present at that second sign of Cana. And that is when the centurion comes to him requesting that his son be cured of a very serious disease. Jesus again expresses his frustration and says, "Unless you people see signs, you cannot believe." But the man earnestly begs Jesus for the health of his son, and off stage, Jesus cures him. Jesus is there with the centurion, but the miracle occurs elsewhere and is not done with any grandiosity. But it is a sign that is very, very personal. Personal to the centurion and his family. Nothing of any grandiosity, nothing done in public. Here's a sign that not only was right there in front of the centurion when he got home, but it was a very personal sign, a very personal encounter of the goodness of Christ in his midst. And in addition to Jesus admonishing us for a lack of faith whenever we ask for grandiose signs to indicate the authenticity of our faith, in addition to telling us that we need to recognize the signs right there in front of us, whether it be Moses and the prophets, whether it be the teachings of Jesus himself in the scriptures, whether it be the work of the church that continues on through thick and thin, because Jesus promised he would always be with it. Regardless of it, we need to also recognize the signs in front of us that are very personal in our own lives. Times which we recognize in a personal way the presence and the love of God, and the presence and the love of Christ. Just as in the case of the centurion, it was a sign, but not a sign for everybody. It was a sign for the centurion, the cure of his son. We too might have experiences of enduring a time of great crisis, perhaps a great illness in which we recovered, or enduring a sense of faith and peace in a loved one who dies very peacefully and is a great witness of faith to us. People often want to look for grandiose signs in the sky, signs from heaven. Jesus says, look at the signs that are right there in front of you. But there are times where we have personal signs, personal ways in which we can recognize the presence, the very real presence of God in our midst. And let us, as we begin this fourth week of Lent, now past pretty much the halfway point of our Lenten journey, let us also ponder those very personal moments in which God has given us signs of his presence. They are signs that are right there in front of us, and that we don't need the grandiose signs in the sky, these signs from heaven, but rather these signs from God in small ways, in the ways that are in front of us in the work of the church, in the words of Scripture, but also signs that speak to us on a very personal level and do constitute for us, as it did the centurion, a personal encounter and a very personal sign of the goodness and the presence of God.